So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's online and in-person program titled Information Graphic Masterpieces, Designing Data Stories. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you online and here in the club rooms and host the program this evening. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, shame on you. You should be a member of the book club. Please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join the book club, to donate to the book club, or just find out more about who we are and what we do. Now, tonight's program, again, is titled Information Graphic Masterpieces, Designing Data Stories. Our speaker is R.J. Andrews. R.J. Andrews is the author of Info We Trust, How to Create Value with Data Graphics. He also is the author of Florence Nightingale, Mortality and Health Diagrams. He's the series editor of Information Graphic Visionaries and a consulting data storyteller. He is also a collector, like many of you. RJ received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Northeastern University and his Master of Business Administration from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, from the earliest printed charts and maps to today's innovative designs, information graphics bridge art and science, helping us engage with complex phenomena. Often featured within books, whether rare historical volumes or contemporary publications, information graphics elevate how we understand the world around us. Tonight, RJ will be talking about how information graphics transform data into compelling visual narratives, illuminating insights that might otherwise remain hidden. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait to the end of his presentation. We'll take questions from you here in the club rooms and from you out there on Zoom. You can use the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom if you have any questions or comments. I'll curate those for our speaker, again, at the end of the presentation. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, R.J. Andrews.
Yeah, let's get things moving.
You want to put your mic on?
Yeah, let's use a mic. Thank you.
I think you know what to do, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Gonna make a graphic.
Is that better, everyone? Okay,
That's great.
let's get things moving. So I believe charts are magical, but a chart alone in the woods, seen by no one, doesn't really create any magic. It doesn't attract any attention. It doesn't inform. So it's only in the mind of the reader that a chart truly comes alive, right? That magic happens in our mind. And I thought today we can talk a little bit about that magic. Let me show you what I mean. So as a chart creator, this is what I do. I show you a tall rectangle. I show you a short rectangle. But I don't have to tell you that it's short and tall. You've already done that work. You've already compared these two rectangles. I've forced you to compare those two rectangles. I've put them in a certain context. I've created this little world, this little microcosm, and I've forced you to engage with it. I believe that meaning, some people say we're pattern recognizing machines, and that might be true, but really I think we're comparison machines. The way the human mind operates is Do they have more money than me? Do I have enough money to live my lifestyle? Do I have enough money to get what I want? It's all these comparisons. Does this person like me? Do they not like me? It's all these comparisons that we go through life making. And so what charts do and what they do really, really well is that they serve really, 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 really odd comparisons to us, things that you couldn't see in any other way, in very, very special forms that everybody can see and understand. And so this isn't completely a how-to sort of talk. We're going to kind of travel through the world of data graphics and look at some of my work, look at some old work, work that inspires me, look at some book arts-ish sort of work. But this idea of comparisons is something that I might tease out from a lot of these examples is, what comparison is the chart trying to make? I moved to California about a decade ago. And I've really fallen in love with California. And so I'm also going to pick out a couple examples related to the Golden State. And so let's start off with a California example. And so like a lot of new Californians, one of the first things I did was go out to Yosemite. And like a lot of people who go to Yosemite for the first time, you're just absolutely amazed by the beauty and the grandeur. Here we have sunset reflected on the river. And if you squint, you can see the two bear cubs right in the center of the frame. I mean, Yosemite is just really, really phenomenal. But I was also very disoriented there. I found it to be a very confusing place. You have these tall trees and these vertical granite walls, and I just had no sense of orientation when I was there. And now I know that this is because unless you're in a meadow, you can't see very far in Yosemite. And also the Yosemite Valley is a very strange shape. It has kind of a Y shape. But going there the first time, I didn't understand any of this. All I knew was that Yosemite was confusing compared to this other place that I loved and I knew very well, which is Zion. And now Zion National Park isn't like Yosemite. It's more of a human scale. It's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit narrower. It's not so deep. And you can have clear line of sight, throughout the valley. So you really always understand where you are when you're in Zion. And so this uneasiness, this feeling of unease that I had when I was in Yosemite, particularly compared to Zion, prompted me to make this short film, which I'm going to show you a 1-minute clip from right now. That's just a clip from the short film. But I want to focus on one frame because this is really the frame that I wanted to see when I was in Yosemite and all confused. That I could feel that Yosemite was bigger, but I really wanted to see it. What I'm doing here is very similar to what we did earlier with the bar chart, is that we have node A versus node B, tall versus short, Zion versus Yosemite. Now, the technical skill needed to make the thing on the right is a little bit more, right? You have to understand USGS data, and you have to be able to plot it and cut transverse profiles and, animate things. But who cares about all that? Anybody who sees this can compare Zion and Yosemite. Behind the scenes, the kind of the guts and the gears of the watch is not what's important. What's important is, can somebody read the time off the watch face, right? And that's what we're kind of obsessed with as data storytellers, is people becoming informed. And I want to give a quick hit to another California project, also involving transverse profiles, called Cross Sections Through California. And so Cross Section Through California is this sort of sideways view at the state. And it is a fold-out map that kind of folds out like this. And what we have is we go down the state and you can see profile cuts hitting all kinds of interesting people and geographic features, and you get a real sense of what California is all about. And this project wasn't so much about, but it was similar to Yosemite in the sense that I'm here in California and I'm confused. California is so big. How can you get any kind of human level understanding of California? And so here's what the map looks like hung up in my old studio. And my work is inspired by a lot of things. It's inspired by curiosity, which we've touched on, but it's also inspired by the history of information design. Because this map was actually executed in a very particular style put forward by the Isotype Institute in the early 1940s during the war. And so here's a selection of their transverse profile cross sections cut. And so here I'm mimicking a very particular design style, and I'm translating it and transforming it, with different new data and at a different scale than what the Isotype Institute did. And so I thought that for a little bit we can look at some of my favorite masterpieces from the history of information design. And what better than to start with another piece from the Isotype Institute. So here's The Ocean Shrinks. I want everybody to just take 20, 30 seconds to read this with your own eyes. The Ocean Shrinks is one of 53 pictorial charts from a book called Only an Ocean Between, created by the Isotype Institute, which was led by Otto and Marie Neurath in the 1940s. And this book basically celebrates British-American relations during World War and walks steps through a series of comparisons between Great Britain and America. And here we have the ocean shrinks. And it's really not the ocean shrinking, right? This chart is about the increasing speed of transportation technology. And in fact, this type of chart is a whole mini genre. There's all kinds of ways of showing technology speeding life forward. There's a lot of things that I really love about this chart. But before I point out the details, I just want to kind of describe it. And so we have the distant past at the very top, and then we have present day at the very bottom in the 1940s. And you can see that in the 1940s, you could take an ocean liner across the Atlantic, or you could fly, right? And so we have this very, very bold red salient hero color right in the middle of the chart. And what I love about this is that it catches your eye, but it's not a big red circle. It's actually an illustration. And so you can see what the chart is about. You can see that what the chart is about is actually changing over time. I like how the picture of the two towns on the left and right actually evolve and grow up to become Manhattan and London. I love how the chart is perfectly situated in its book format, right? Because the graphic isn't centered. If the graphic was centered, the image would have been lost, right in the gutter. And so everything is just shifted just a little bit. And of course, is this a data visualization? Yeah. Everybody's read the fine print that each wave represents one day of travel. And so, yeah, you can actually count the waves and see how many days it would take at different points in history. And so this is, maybe almost kiddish or cartoonish, but even though it's very simple, I consider this like very, very sophisticated. And the Isotype Institute were chasing, a visual language that was a near universal language. And they had all kinds of wonderful experiments on how you can use pictures to inform the masses. The next slide is a little bit different. And so balloon adventures were really, really exciting during the 1870s. And there was a particular type of chart form developed in order to catalog these adventures. And so the thing that's most exciting about this chart, which shows the altitude of the balloon, not only above sea level, but above ground level, because you can see the little towns and you can see the little ridge lines in the valleys. And so you have this left to right over time, but then on the bottom, you can also see how the balloon traveled over the map, right? And there's all these beautiful ways that you're using the data that the balloon is collecting about how hot, about its altitude, its clock, where it is, when, but then you're also matching that, just like the Isotype Institute did with this pictorial flourish. And so you're illustrating the clouds, you're illustrating the little cartoon balloon, you're showing the towns. I love the double axis that we have this in feet and also in meters. And so everybody in the room can enjoy, after the talk, that a lot of these examples are actually on the table and in the room so that you can actually see them, not like this. This isn't how they're supposed to be. This isn't how they're supposed to be seen. You're supposed to see them right in the book form. Often in charts, books are sort of great vessels, but the normal book form isn't enough. And so we make these crazy elaborate foldouts in order to convey exactly what we want to say. And so, one of the longer foldouts is this political timeline by Walter Houghton. And this colorful example is from 1880. The one in the room is the second edition from 1881, which in fact does go an additional year out to the right than the first one. And if anybody's involved in the design of books, I just want to like zoom in and just imagine using modern technology to lay out all this text, right? I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I've actually tried, I've gone back and I've opened programs and I've tried and attempted something like this, and it is not easy. It's not easy at all. This is 1880. I'm going to go to another one. This is a book from, this comes from a book called Billions for Defense from the mid 1930s. And the idea of stacking coins is a very old way of explaining how a bar chart works, like a vertical bar chart, a column chart, is that the idea is that you have stuff and you have a stack of stuff and you can compare the size of stack of stuff. William Playfair used the idea of a stack of guinea coins to explain how his charts worked. Way back in 1785, 1786. This is from the 1930s, and you have taxes paid into the country. What I really like about this is, again, that pictorial flourish, but also the idea that you can see each additional contribution going up, how it's just offset just a little bit. I love how the alcohol is perched up on top of barrels, right? And so you have taxes paid, but then you also want to know, how do you spend them, right? And so you can also see this right in the middle of the table. I want to show one from by a fellow who's probably familiar to the book club. So this is an illustration by Dwiggins, and this was just explained to me recently, but that and so how many people? Boris, you know this one. Okay, so so Dwiggins is sort of this, I don't know, almost like a polymath sort of designer, can make anything out of anything, including marionette puppets, and he publishes this satirical pamphlet in 1919, basically mocking the quality of the book trade, right? And the whole idea is that it's a series of interviews with all people in industry, and all the interviews are written by him and his buddy. But what was explained to me recently by a friend at Cooper Union is that, this isn't type, this is lettering, right? It looks like type, but this is actually all Dwiggins hand lettering, and that's how you get this, incredible like smashing of letters as that curve, just drops through the bottom of the frame. This is from 1919, and I featured this chart recently in an exhibition at Cooper Union, which is how I learned this important distinction between type and lettering. And so I paired it with and the gist of the exhibition was we paired contemporary work on the walls with historic work in the vitrines, and so we had a couple of New Yorker cartoons which similarly have downward sloping, things are getting bad kind of line graphs, right? And so, here's the one that people enjoyed the most. Don't get it. We had all those meetings. Isn't that true? And so there's something that's really beautiful. There's something really beautiful, captivating, engaging about charts, right? And so I think that we might think of charts as analytic tools, as tools that are going to help us surface insights. And I have friends who that's all that they do, and charts can certainly do that. But the way I think about information graphics is that they're more social tools. These are coordinating mechanisms, they're forcing functions. They're things that we can put on a table, everybody can gather around and have a discussion around. You can disagree with the chart, but it's this sort of convening tool. I want to zoom into the piece right in the foreground here. This is by my friend Maggie Shee, and it's 140 years of climate data. Right? I mean, how incredible is that? And in the room, we had every object spotlit, and so in the room, the light kind of just like shone right through it. So the other half, half of the exhibit was this kind of like new chart, old chart, kind of going back and forth. And I don't have an image of, but with Maggie, we have we had a 1960 something copy of the first publication of the Keeling curve. Does anybody know what the Keeling curve is? Yeah, I see a couple nods, but basically the idea is that CO2 in the atmosphere is going up, and it has a very regular up down, but going up over time. And so that look up the Keeling curve and look up the story of how it was invented, and the story of Keeling, and kind of what a almost a mad determination that he had in order to produce the data that resulted in that curve. It's a phenomenal story of science. So Maggie expressed similar data in almost too beautiful a way, right? But it is we're going from this very cool period to a hot period. So the first half was this old, new, and then the second half featured a bunch of words, original illustrations, and large images from my new book, Info We Trust. And so this is also a bit of a book talk, right? And so Info We Trust, how to create value with data graphics. There's that word value again, the value of charts as social tools, the importance of when you make charts, that you think of making charts as a craft. And so I'm going to show just a little bit about a little bit of the book as we flip through. And so, of course, it's a book about information graphics. So we have a table of contents, but we also have a map of contents, right? Just like, I mean, when you open a book and there's a map in the very beginning, it's going to be a good book, right? All the best books start with a map. And so when I think about information graphics, I think about how poorly we understand the world around us, how poorly we really understand reality, and how much we need each other, to understand reality better, how much and how possible it is to see reality in new, helpful, and interesting ways. We think back to that illustration of the taxes and how we spend the taxes. There's no way that you can see the GDP of a country. If the physical, monetary bills, like, they don't exist. Like, most of them are figments of our collective imagination. Even if you did have all the bills, you couldn't physically stack them all, right? And even if you could physically stack them all, you could only do that once for now. You couldn't do it for last year and the year before and see them, in one view. And so that is the magic of what charts do, is that they take this thing that we all agree is kind of there, and they illustrate that, they put it in a form, and that we can all appreciate. And so sometimes I call myself a data storyteller. Here's data storytelling. And there are different themes that run throughout the book. And one of those themes is the ideas of and when I say themes, I mean kind of aesthetic themes, vibes. And so one of those is medieval knights. Here's the evolution of helmets. Um, and so I wanted to tell you kind of like a little capsule story from the book. And it starts down the road. Oh my goodness, almost 8 or 9 years ago at Stanford. And I was at a conference there, and I was at the best part of the conference, was after the conference was over, across the street at the pub. And I overheard somebody say, Gothic cathedrals point toward Jerusalem. Has anybody heard something like this before? No? Physical orientation? Well, I heard this. I thought it was insane. I didn't believe it, but it kind of stuck with me. And it stuck with me in a way that is like, I need to look into this. Okay, so what does it mean for a cathedral to point you somewhere, right? Let's figure that out first. And so when you're in a cathedral, you're worshiping, you're facing the altar, right? But you can imagine that, that arrow just keeps going through the altar. And the idea is that if you just kept going, you'd hit the holy city, right? So, I mean, in some sense, that's crazy. But then if you know anything about cathedrals, they are deeply symbolic, right, in their architecture. And so why shouldn't they be symbolic in their orientation as well? And if you know anything about, religion, facing towards cities is not, like that odd of an idea. And so like maybe there's something to this idea. And so I went and got data, right? And I limited my search to French Gothic cathedrals for a bunch of reasons. I plotted them on a map, right? And then I went one by one on OpenStreetMap to each cathedral, and I measured its orientation, right? So here's Notre Dame de Paris, right? And my little table, I marked that down as 25 degrees south of east. And you go cathedral, 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 cathedral. There's Paris. You can see where it is, 25 degrees south of east. And I plot this angles going up and down, and you can see that, there's sort of maybe a cluster around eastward, which is kind of interesting. On the horizontal axis, I have the date that the cathedral construction started, because that's the date when orientation is set. And I was like, oh, there's no pattern over time, so we can compress this, get rid of that dimension. And, things start to get a little exciting. Like, it seems like we have some sort of maybe modal distribution or something. Like they're all kind of together. Like maybe there's something to this. And so you want to go further. You want to go further. And so you say, okay, well, what does it mean to face Jerusalem? Like, which direction's Jerusalem? I know it's east, but exactly where, like how east? And so France is big enough that, the direction toward Jerusalem is different, depending on where you are in France. So you combine all this knowledge and you arrive at this kind of map. And looking at this kind of map, I look at all my little orange cathedrals and the big yellow arrows going to Jerusalem. And, we ask our question. I mean, I don't think they're facing Jerusalem. Nope, I don't think so. And so what's going on? And so I go back to this distribution. And now that I've been waiting in this problem long enough, and, the last 4 minutes took me, 4 or 5 weeks. I hit upon a research paper because I've learned more about the keywords and everything else. And what this research paper explained is this. Let's see, let's make this bigger. Cathedrals don't face Jerusalem. Cathedrals face sunrise. And in particular, they face sunrise on a particular day that's important to the cathedral. So a feast day of a saint, for example. And you can plot, where the sun rises in France. And of course, the sun, rises at a different point on the horizon every day. And so you have a whole big band, and you can see most of the cathedrals fit in that band. And you look up the history of the other 3 cathedrals. Turns out they're all built on the ruins of churches whose orientations were set like long before it was fashionable to face sunrise. And so this chart explains it all. And you might find it interesting or even enlightening, maybe illuminating. But if I just started here and I didn't walk you through step by step, essentially the journey that I went on, I don't think this would mean anything to you, right? And so there's this process in creating data stories where it's like, I want to, I want to, show something to somebody that, that not only, informs them, attracts their attention so that I have a chance at informing them. There's an element to the story which is kind of personal, which is that, how many people have seen Notre Dame de Paris? Yeah, a lot of people. And, there's a lot of bad tourist photos of Notre Dame, and this one happens to be mine, right? And, there's a particular, I don't know, awe-inspiring sort of excitement of being in front of that cathedral. And what's so incredible is that you can be overwhelmed with the architecture and the history and all the stories, fiction and historical, like, that are wrapped up in that one building, all the culture and the bells and the chanting. But, you can be in front of that cathedral and you'll never know that it's facing you towards a particular sunrise. In fact, you could be in front of any single cathedral in France. You could actually be there. You could smell it. You have the most visceral experience, but you will not understand. And so I have this personal, idea of how powerful it would be if you could be in like a big white room, just like the Matrix, right? And have all these cathedrals pop into place, right? And see how they're all facing, radiating out to different sunrises on different days. So this is sort of a little hint of a little bit of the storytelling and a little of the investigation, that's in the rest of the book. We have, only so much time. And so I'm going to scroll forward just a little bit. I want to talk book arts, so here's Info We Trust. I want to talk about book arts a little bit because this is a place that's, dedicated to celebrating and preserving and advancing the book arts, which, I really, really appreciate. There's a slide a little bit earlier of me in David Rumsey's basement. And one of the maps that I brought here today, my favorite thematic map of all time. And it's all about ticket sales at different Parisian theaters. It's an absolutely, wonderful composition. And, maybe afterwards we can talk about the map in person a little bit. But, this map, the first time I went to David's house, was right there, and he set it out to show it to me. Right. And it's incredible that I have a picture of, of this moment, and here's that map as it exists, in my book. And I bring up this example because, the importance of collecting, the importance of not just collecting, but sharing your collections, sharing your enthusiasm, sparking excitement in others. And so that fold-out California map that I showed at the beginning of the talk was the first thing I made for Visionary Press. And it was sort of a very, very early pandemic project. But the pandemic kept going, didn't it? And so we got to have another pandemic project. And so I created in Dogpatch Visionary Press. And so everybody, on Zoom at home, you can visit visionarypress.com to see all of this. But our second project was a little bit more ambitious. And so we raised over $100,000 on Kickstarter and launched Information Graphic Visionary Series, which Kevin mentioned earlier. And so each of these books is dedicated to somebody who did something just absolutely spectacular with information graphics. And so we have Emma Willard, who made the most batshit crazy maps of time you've ever seen. Florence Nightingale, if you want a discussion of value of charts, Florence Nightingale is associated with the sanitary movement, okay? Sanitary movement is credited with saving 1 billion lives. Billion with a B is a lot of people. Now, how many lives did Florence Nightingale save? Now, she was not the leader, she was a leader, for, a while, but not the entire stretch of the sanitary movement. So answer that question. Then answer me, how many lives did any one of her publications save? And then once you answer that, how many lives did any one of the charts in those publications save? It's really hard to put a dollar value or a human life value on charts. Sometimes, all we can do is look at people like Nightingale and see that she kept using the charts. And she kept going back to the forum over a long time. And she kept pumping a lot of money and resources and time into these charts. And you can see, we found her manuscript drafts. So you could see, how they worked on them. You can see the discussion between Nightingale, her colleagues, the printers, the lithographers, and you can see how much they cared about, the craft work that went into making a good chart. And so the fact that, she kept using the charts is sort of like how I know I'm doing a good job with my clients, which is that they rehire me. That's the only honest feedback that you can really get, that in this craft. And the third book is Etienne Jules Mouret. And so each of these books, they have like this big, bold, modern, colorful wrapper, right? And it's almost like a container. And you pull them back, and you see the original graphic, you see the gold. And so there's a lot of work into the not the craft of information graphics, but the craft of making the books themselves. Because we want to elevate the field of information graphics, and the best way that we know how to do that is to treat them correctly and to give them the type of containers that they deserve. And so that's why we're trying to make beautiful books that celebrate information graphics. I want to wrap up, by returning us to Yosemite. And so I made this, again, maybe I moved here in 2015 and made this soon after. So about 10 years ago. And I was very satisfied with it. It kind of like answered my curiosity. But over time, there was just this kind of like gnawing kind of like piece that was missing, which is that you can look at this in 2 dimensions like we are here and learn a lot. But if you could see it in 3 dimensions, like it might not be better, but it would be different. And maybe it'd be weird, but maybe it'd be interesting. And so I had this idea of, what if you're a God walking over the face of America with a cookie cutter, and you took this cookie cutter and you put it down into the ground, and you kind of took out these even-sized sections from the earth, and you took all these sections and you put them on a chessboard, right? So you could compare them all. And so I was thinking about this idea at the same time that I befriended a woman in Shanghai named Wendy. And Wendy's an absolute magician. She's incredible. And she was experimenting with this tool called Blender, which many of you may be heard of, doing 3D modeling. And so Wendy and I spent about a year or so futzing around with a project that was whose title is inspired by Dandelion chocolates. You go to the Ferry Building, and Dandelion has like all the chocolates laid out with their beautiful like typography, like labeling each one. Okay, so inspired by the national parks and Dandelion chocolates, we started making these. And so these are little 5 by 5 mile sections of national parks raised above sea level. And so indeed we can compare Yosemite against Zion. Now, again, I don't think it's a better comparison. It's just a different comparison. You can see different things, right? And can zoom all the way out. And this is designed in a very particular way. Why? Because this is designed, to fit into a book, right? Okay, and so here we arrange our delicious parks in a way to, fit this book. Again, avoiding that gutter, right? And you can see the atlas where this was published right on the table. I'll show you a couple zoom ins so that of parks that are maybe familiar to you. And so, like, why did it take us a year to do this? It didn't take us a year to get the data and make these 3D objects. Like, what took so long is figuring out how to style all of these. And because we're not trying to give you a satellite aerial like photography view of what this actually looks like. We're trying to give you a sense of what it feels like, right? And so we wanted our colors, our textures to be closer to a poster, a national parks poster, than an aerial photography. And so for certain parks, in order to do that, we had to do special things. So in Crater Lake, for example, we're bringing in bathymetry data, so you can actually see what's happening under the surface of the water. And volcanoes, we're actually taking some aerial imagery texture and layering that in to our 3D model in order to punch out some of all that rock. Well, this is me, and this is Wendy. Sometimes, we did this entire project mostly asynchronously. She in Shanghai, me in San Francisco. When it was done, we finally met in real life for the first time. And so I sometimes end by asking people to go make great charts And I've amended that to say, go make great charts together, right? And so does anybody know the story of Kedalion? No? So the idea is like the hunter Orion, has kind of a rowdy night and gets into some trouble and is blinded as punishment. And Kedalion comes to Orion's help. And so there's this idea that, we have these, we do stand on the shoulders of giants, right? But we also have friends who stand on our shoulders and help us point the way, because Orion's blind, and so Kedalion's showing him the way. And particularly what he's doing is he's facing him towards the sun, right? In order to heal his sight, just like the cathedrals faces towards the sunrise. So my name's RJ. I'm absolutely obsessed with charts. I think we're going to have some discussions, some back and forth. I hope everybody in the room gets to hang out a little bit so we can look at some of the rare works that I brought. But I appreciate it. Again, go make charts, go make great charts together.
That's great. Yeah. I have so many personal questions, but we're going to start with some questions here in the audience. Yeah.
I got hooked on the Napoleon's March Across
Sure.
Europe, and then I read the Tufte books, and I said, oh, wow, I could do this. This is really,
Yeah.
it's really impressive to be able to do this. It's one thing to appreciate them. But so now with artificial intelligence, how do you think that's going to?
I think that the biggest thing artificial intelligence. So it's like the first question we're getting all the time. This is the biggest effect that artificial intelligence is having on everything. It's certainly not helping us make good work. What AI is doing right now is it's training people to be satisfied with mediocre work. It's not a threat to, it might be a threat to my career and my industry. It might be a threat to all of us. I think it's a threat. I think it's a threat to civilization. Is that you're like, if you look at, if you understand any art form, there's an ebb and flow to art forms, right? There's some decades where things stink, right? And I'm really worried we're stepping into a decade or longer when stuff's gonna stink, because people who go to book club events, still might have good taste, but your average person's not. And so film, books, charts, etc., aren't going to have to perform. Now, of course, that means that there's always opportunities to do stuff better and break through. But honestly, that's like, it's something I've already seen, here and there in my own work, is that people aren't willing, because to make something really good takes a lot of work, a lot of resources. Essentially, you need a patron, to make art. And I'm worried that that's going away. And so there's rosy, optimistic, positive answers to your question as well, but that's the first one I had. Yeah.
Well, Anne and Joel on Zoom have great minds think alike, because Joel's asking you to mention the famous graphic of the Count of Napoleon's army.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's have a visual, right? Okay, so what's really interesting. Okay, so there's a few things that are interesting about that chart. I'll talk obliquely about it. You just brought it up, so I can say whatever I want. So Edward Tufte should be celebrated for a lot of reasons. One of them is that he revived a lot of the work that's in this book. And so Marais is famous for sort of being the founder of cinema, and this idea of sort of superimposed photography. Marais also wrote the first book cataloging what he called the graphic method, what we call data visualization, with all these illustrated examples. And the thing about Marais was, until my book was published, is that it's been trapped in French since 1878. And so there were some insiders like Tufte who knew it and were able to go into that Marais book, extract the examples, and republish them, and make a career out of it. And he pulled from lots of places, but very much from this particular text. The reason I bring this text up is that the original Menard is it's a diptych, essentially. There's two images in it, and Marais only published one. And then Tufte only published that same one. And so he sort of focused, and all of our focus is kind of only on one half of the story. Now, I didn't mean to talk about it, but there is sort of a sideways view into that chart. If we look at my French map, let's let's fly around it. So here's the map, yeah. And then top right corner, we have an inset chart. And so here's ticket sales over several decades. The yellow bars are outlier years. Those are the years of the Paris Expo, Universal Exposition. And so those are outliers, lots of tourists, big ticket sales. Okay, forget about the big ticket sales. What's going on in some years? Huh? All right, who knows French history? What's going on? War, Franco-Prussian War. Yeah, okay, so early 1870s, Franco-Prussian War. There's a man who's 89 years old. He was forced into retirement at age 70. Okay, he was a civil engineer. He did all his work teaching students. He got his start working for Napoleon as an engineer, repairing bombed out ports for, and now he's old. He has to retire at age 70. He starts making maps for his colleagues in Paris and for fun. And he published a design treatise at age 80, explaining everything that he's learned, why he did it, who he's inspired by. And he just keeps living. He lives all the way up to 89 to when Prussia is actually sieging Paris. And he makes this. So Menard, Charles Joseph Menard, this is the last image he makes. He makes it when he's 89 years old, when the Prussians are marching against Paris, and then he flees Paris and dies in Exodus as an 89-year-old. It's an incredible story. And so the interpretation of this image is you have Hannibal marching on Rome and wasting away on the top half of the image. On the bottom half, you have the same thing happening to Napoleon marching on Moscow and wasting away. And so the idea, one way to interpret this chart, and the way I like to interpret this chart, this is an anti-war protest statement by Menard. War is hell. Nothing good comes out of it. Everyone's going to die, et cetera. And so that's my personal connection, to this graphic. Yeah.
I just want to add, Bruce also on Zoom is asking about this. The same thing. Everybody is all about this, the more time Musk. Any questions here in the club room? I don't think we talked about like your art training. Like are you creating these graphics, and what is your, mechanical engineer, what we know about, but what about artistic background? Illustration.
Mostly I think somebody asked me earlier, how'd you get into this? And I think that there's like a page by page kind of like explanation, but in some sense, I think everybody was into this at some point. Everybody loves looking at diagrams and maps as a child. Everybody loves, kind of like drawing with crayons. At least I did. But I think a lot of kids do. And then at a certain point, all that's taken away from you. And I was lucky enough to be dumb enough to fall back into it. So it took working as a pure engineer for a while and becoming really frustrated with that because I didn't get to use my whole head working as a pure engineer, that I wanted something that was both technical, but also human facing. And information graphics certainly affords that. People come to information graphics from design, from engineering. There's a lot of kind of ex-architects. And so I came from the engineering path. And so I have some technical chops. I don't have a lot of, and I have engineering design training, but everything else is, sort of not so much self-taught as, I've made a lot of mistakes and, pig-headed enough to kind of like keep going. Yeah.
Well, we'll close with one last question, so we have time for people here to come see some of the materials that are here on the table. And it actually talks, it's about using charts and infographics in a way to combat misinformation and general lack of knowledge, because they can be abused, right?
They can be abused, but here's the thing. Pick whatever podcaster your politics aren't aligned with. And it's really easy for that person to say something and to keep saying things that can warp somebody's perception of reality. It's a lot harder to make images that do that. Now, of course, it's possible. Images have always been used for propaganda. You know, there's phenomenal statistical atlases out of forget any country, out of the 1930s. Like, let's just say that. Pick your country, and they made persuasive, you know, statistical atlases that were pure propaganda. So it's possible to lie with maps, or, you know, but it's a lot harder. You know, a simple way of saying this is that, you know, if you ask me directions somewhere, I can say, you know, go this way and then go that way, take a left, take a right, and you'll be there. And I can make a mistake saying that. I could lie to you very easily. But if I take out a map and I show you where it is on a map and I direct you using a map, it's not that there's more trust, it's just you get an enormous amount of context when I do that. And that's the thing that that images can do. Boris, yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's much more difficult to buy this images, but the problem is that if you do it successfully, it's much more persuasive and much more. So basically, it's a very hard, but it's very dangerous field.
Yeah, it's certainly a powerful tool. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that there was a lot of fear at the last election that, you know, there would be a lot of doctored images or videos that would just change people's perception. Not a lot, just enough, just tweak them a little bit. And it doesn't seem like that happened, at least not in this past election. But I mean, it's certainly on our radar, and I feel like we're watching out for it. Thank you.
Well, one little
Yeah.
continued question from that last one.
Yeah.
What about like fact checking and accuracy in terms of all of these images and graphics that we're seeing? Is that just assumed that somebody is fact checking and it's accurate?
There's an element of design, and you've seen that this is one of the problems with the internet generally, is that once upon a time, you know, unprofessional things on the internet looked unprofessional. Now everything looks professional, and design is no longer an indicator of the quality of the content, right? And so, you know, most of these examples I'm showing are, you know, to my eye, you know, beautifully designed, and so it makes you want to makes you want to believe it. That's true, and that is also something that we have to be on guard for.
That's it. That'll be the last question.
Okay.
Other than letting people know that RJ's book is here. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to jump on the screen.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I say goodbye to folks.
Oh, please.
Oh, what's happening? Can they see me?
Oh, I thought you wanted.
As long as they don't need to see me. We're just going to wrap up. If you're on Zoom, thanks again for joining us on Zoom. Thanks for joining us here in the club rooms. Big round of applause for our speaker, RJ Andrews, and for you for joining us tonight. Thanks everyone for coming. You can register for any book club presentation online at bccbooks.org/programs. You could use the link in any of the emails that you're getting from the book club to register. You could also call or email me. I'm Kevin@bccbooks.org. I'll sign you up for any program that you want. Thanks everyone for coming. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a great night out there on Zoom. And if you're here in the club rooms, please come up, talk to RJ, and look at some of the materials. Thanks, everyone.